Hello and welcome to this latest Guild webinar. We're going to do a slightly different session today. So for those of you that are regular attendees, we are going to do what I would call a hybrid session. So there's going to be a couple of slides at the beginning, which are mainly the Guild slides and a few other bits. And then this is going to be more of a discussion with a kind of a question and answers. And you'll see that I'm joined by 3 people. So I'm going to ask attendees to keep their cameras off, because I suspect we might be pushing it a bit with 4 of us on camera. The only reason I'm on camera is because otherwise it's odd if you're not talking. You get kind of people talking to somebody you can't see. It's a bit odd. So we're joined by Richard Merry, who's a Guild member, Jessica Feinstein, who is also a Guild member, and Sue Honoré. Have I said your name right, Sue?
Honoré, it's French.
Oh, Honoré. Oh, yeah, I'm not giving, my French is really poor, sorry. Who is from the Oxfordshire Family History Society, as are Richard and Jessica. So we're just going to quickly whiz through some slides, the usual ones. I've actually got them working today, so we're just going to have a quick whiz through so you can see this. Or at least it would do if I could actually get it to work. Let's have a look. It's not going to play nice. Okay, so if you're not a Guild member, this is the Guild's website. So if you're interested in anything to do with surnames, and there's a good chance you probably are interested in surnames because you're here, that is the Guild's website. So one-name.org, and you can put your surname of choice into the little search box on there, which is kind of towards the middle at the top, and see if if the surname is registered already. If it's not registered, you could perhaps look and see if you're interested in registering it and joining. And if you look towards the bottom, you'll see the numbers of instances where your surname of choice, whatever you've put in the search box, is how it's represented in any of the Guild indexes, of which some are available to the public. So you can have a look there. So just quickly to find your way around the screen, on your right hand side, you've got what I would call a little kind of dashboard thing, really. So you should see on there is a section that says Q&A or questions. If you have any questions, and I hope that you do, otherwise I'll have to be asking lots and lots of questions extra at the end, please pop the questions in there, or we can try and work out and we can actually open it up and you can all ask questions at the end in a kind of a controlled manner. And if you have any problems, so you can't, you've got problems hearing, turn your volume up, check that your headset's turned on and so forth. It is being recorded, this session, and I will keep the questions in, so you will be able to, should you wish to, go back and listen again to the whole thing or work out whereabouts the questions are. If you have any questions after the event, or you have a great title for a webinar, you'd like to give a webinar, you can email us at webinars@one-name.org. That's the question box. So that's where you can see where the question box is. And at the moment, you should all be muted. So that will be, and we're going to do the question. So today we're going to shine a spotlight on Oxfordshire surnames. And as I've already said, we've got Richard, Jessica, and Sue. I'm not even going there with the surname bits again, in case I get Sue's wrong. And we're going to talk about the surnames and this great project. And look at that, a nice picture of the book title, and the cover and the contents page. It's a little out of date. I've been told the contents page, it looks like there's been some jiggling around of stuff, but it just means if you have already ordered the book, you've got more of a surprise when it arrives. And if you want to order the book, I've been told reliably you still can order the book. You can go to the Oxfordshire Family History Society webpage. I should have put it on that slide, but haven't, and the website is ofhs.uk, so nice and easy to remember. So I'm hoping now that you can see everybody, in addition to that slide. Paul, are you there? Can you see the 4 of us talking and the slides?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's get the questions underway. So, where did this all start from? Who's going to take that one?
Probably me.
Okay.
My Merry family is from Oxfordshire, so I've had an interest in the county, and I'm also interested in DNA. And I can't remember exactly when it was, but about nearly 10 years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, I approached the OFHS to start up an Oxfordshire geographical dual DNA project. The dual DNA bit means it'll be for Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA. And I was asking for some help from somebody who's actually in Oxfordshire. And this is where Sue came in. And we started the DNA project. And it's now reached about 500 members. Now, this went along for a while, and we're sort of still learning a bit with the DNA stuff, but it's very obvious when you start looking at DNA results and matches with other people. DNA is not a great help unless there's surname or a family tree or something to go with it. If you look at the DNA websites, there are so many people have absolutely no information about their ancestry. So we thought we'd start collecting information on surnames as well. And we managed to accumulate people, because one of the things that we ask people who join the DNA project, we ask them to tell us about their family history, about their family in Oxfordshire. It might be a surname, so a Y DNA ancestry, or it might be a mitochondrial female line ancestry, or it might just be a autosomal DNA connection. And I don't know whether Sue appreciates me for this, but I think I suggested we should write a book.
I've cursed him ever since.
I think us stimulating the getting the surname information in led to Sue in particular stirring up people to start searching through sources, various sources, and Sue can tell you about this, to start extracting surnames from a whole lot of things. And Sue, would you like to say a bit about that?
Well, what we started to do is we realized that we have an awful lot of surname records, and everybody goes searching through census records or some of the very common things, but there were an awful lot of bits of information that we could use going right back to medieval times on surnames in Oxfordshire. So I went around talking to people who had written books, essentially saying, can we extract as an index, not the complete entry from the book, an exact copy, but an index of every single person who's mentioned in your book? And we've had some superb people getting back to me saying, of course you can. So we've been going through every possible book we can, from places like the Victoria County History, Oxford Records Society, Black Sheep books, Eureka books, all sorts of things, and literally creating an enormous database of every mention of every individual that we can find who was living in Oxfordshire between about 1200 and 1900. We stop our project at 1900, by the way. And that was the beginning, along with all the BMD records that Oxfordshire Family History Society has, so especially baptisms and burials, and census records, for us to then say, let's get all this data together and do something with it. And from that, some of the chapters of the book started.
Interesting. So I've got I just want to quickly go back to the DNA element. So presumably on the DNA project, you do actually have people that have adopted, perhaps no, presumably they do their test, and that maybe flags up. Maybe they know they're adopted, and maybe it flags up, but actually it aligns with a Merry. Or have I not quite right?
Oh, well, it can do, but I've never found one.
Okay.
I only match with my fifth cousin personally, but there are lots of people whose well, we have surnames that are known to be Oxfordshire surnames, and I think that people poke around, especially if they have a matching surname and they find the people they match with all belong to the Oxfordshire DNA project. So they join as well. And there's particularly people in America and Australia and other sort of places where people move to. If they match established Oxfordshire families, they can take advantage of that in working out their family histories.
Okay.
There are some people with fairly long-standing Oxfordshire surnames that don't match with their expected surname as well, and that gets very difficult because usually those matches are fair. You can tell from the DNA test that they had common ancestors, usually 300 or 400 years ago, and you've got no idea how the DNA of a surname happens to be the same as other ones. But there's a few of those, and you can't say which is the correct surname from that without a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay. So are you enabling people to import in autosomal results?
Well, just by becoming a member, if you've got Oxfordshire ancestry, yes, the project's run through Family Tree DNA.
Yeah.
And if people with not their male line or their female line direct is not necessarily Oxfordshire, but they have Oxfordshire ancestry, there's a lot of people in that situation. They can join, and Family Tree DNA have some tools where they can see if they match with other people in the Oxfordshire DNA project. I match with 4 or 5 people in the project, and none of them I knew about before as possible relatives, and a couple of them I've been able to add them to my tree just by being aware of who they are and how we're related. So it has a good purpose as well, the autosomal stuff.
Okay, so that's kind of the end of the DNA bit. I thought as we were moving along, I wanted to just kind of get it out there. So we've had somebody actually, Alan, who's asked. I would normally leave the questions to the end, but as we're kind of for where I'm going to go next, this is a good chance to get it in there. So Alan's asking, did you use the 14th century poll tax returns?
Yes, we've got some of those in there as well.
Okay.
But, you know, when you get back into that period, it's really difficult in terms of surnames. And there's no guarantee that, John of Burford ended up with the surname Burford. So we've got a lot of data, but we're not necessarily linking everything up. We're just saying we're putting it out. When we eventually publish this whole database, it's going to go out there and people can search it, but it's not necessarily going to link that up and say that this is the ancestor of so-and-so or whatever.
Okay, so actually this project is more than DNA plus a book. You've got a whole
much
third
more
bit. Okay, that's interesting. So tell me where it goes next.
Way you go, Sue.
Well, we've got this database which we're hoping to put together, which will be available to Oxfordshire Family History Society members. That's a project that'll take another year or two to get sorted. And we're also producing little sheets of one name Oxfordshire surnames. So if somebody's got an Oxfordshire surname, we're doing a little bit based on all the work we've done in the project, which will show you where the name was back in the 16th century or 17th century, 18th, 19th centuries. We'll talk a little bit about where you can find books that have got the surname and that sort of thing, where it moved to. Those are all coming along. So we've got the DNA project, we've got the book, we've got the database, we've got one name sheets, and I think we'll just continue it as a research project. So we will continue to research things that we find are worthwhile and do what we need to do with that data.
Some of the surname sheets are listed on the OFHS website. There's 5 up there, I think, up there, Sue, at present.
Yeah, I had a quick look actually earlier, and because I have a question you'd be surprised to know. Sorry, Bishop, carry on.
But there are so many surnames that it's impossible for just a couple of us to cope with it all while writing books and things. But the one name sheets, Sue and I cut down to about a short list of about 400. And there are other surnames that are very much Oxfordshire surnames, but they just, because there's this mountain of stuff to try and plough through, we had to cut it down to about, and we cut it down to about 400. Well, there's about 5 on the website which were put up as a sort of to test the water a little bit. And there's quite a few more in the pipeline that once this book's out of the way, hopefully they'll start coming along more regularly. I won't be around, I think, when the 400th one is done. So we need to get probably some other people writing these things.
Okay, and that leads me to my next question, because I've seen a rough draft of the contents and the surnames. So I know some of the surnames that's in the book. And I don't care how much you cross my palm with silver, I won't be sharing any of the details unless it relates to one of my own surnames. So I happen to know that it's a butcher reference. I don't know how big a bit it is. It could just be a one-liner. I've taken apart and ordered the book, but so are you going to let people who say, look, my name is in this book, write their surname sheet, subject to suitable editing?
No, we won't do that. We're producing the data based on what we have. Okay. And that includes people who may be running a one-name study or have done some very good research. We will listen to what they have and take that on board. And there is one section towards the end where we say there is information on this, 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 and this. But no, we won't let other people write it, because we're going for a standard format based largely on what we have gathered at a central point rather than have individuals produce their own.
Okay, so if a member of the guild has an Oxfordshire surname, they could contact you and say, I'm happy to contribute something if you want to use it for one of your sheets.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. And if we have somebody that we feel has done some great research, quite often we'll write a sheet and then send it to them and say, what do you think of this? So we're very happy to have people involved in some of the later checking and editing.
Yeah, okay, sort of a buddy up.
We've passed a couple of those past people with one name studies.
Okay.
And the reaction was fairly good, I think. So
I thought it was an ambitious project. I mean, I joined Oxfordshire. I don't actually have any Oxfordshire surnames in particular, but somebody wrote a really great email that said, "Why don't you join? It's a bargain." So I thought, actually, do you know what? I will join. So I've joined, and it came with a little bump of stuff you get when you first join, and there was an A4 sheet about the DNA project. So I was impressed at that point. Then I caught wind that there was this book coming. Then I saw the thing in the last journal that said pre-order, so I did fairly quickly. So now I know there's this other database and there's these sheets. I think it's a really great example for other societies to be looking in and thinking how they can perhaps diversify slightly and make a shift, because we know that genealogical societies are losing members, and actually I think this has the potential. Yes, of course, you need volunteers to help with that workload, and I'm sure the three of you would agree with that. It has been a significant amount of work. But if you tell me how much work, I could probably double that to be actually the realistic number of how much work it's taken. But actually, I think it's a really good example of having the ability to not just have your databases out there so that you can publish and get some income in as a charity, but you have this ability almost to keep on using that to gain, effectively using the databases and the material that you have and earn from it more than once, basically, and do something constructive and different so that it's more than just about having a birth index or a baptisms index and a burials index. And oh, look, we've given ourselves another new index. And when you actually look at it, all you've done is merge the burials and the baptisms. What you've done is you may have done that, but you've added a whole load of other stuff to it. And I think there is potential for not only other societies to focus on what you've done, but also to inspire perhaps one-namers to be buddying up with the society that they may be. If you've got a northeast surname, for example, you might be buddying up, you could potentially buddy up with a northeast group to at least make sure, rather than just getting the journal from that society, you have the ability to perhaps to effectively draw in between the two. So I'll support the society, but it gives me a platform in which I can say I have X as a study. And so you kind of aligning nicely. I'm not sure I've really articulated that terribly well, but I'm hoping people will be watching and listening and thinking, actually, we can support this by buying the book, saying we have a study, or I'm really interested in this surname, and I would like to be able to give you, or at least I'm telling you I exist, basically. And then if you choose to come to them and say, would you be interested in helping or giving us some information or whatever, it will generate some dialogue, even if that's an email dialogue.
You mentioned the surname Butcher.
Yeah.
Oxfordshire is a little bit interesting to me because in the among the top 10 surnames in Oxfordshire in the parish register baptisms, there are a lot of occupational surnames. Smith, of course, is the most common, but Taylor and Gardner, and I think Butcher and Cox, which I think derives from Cook, are all in the top 10 in Oxfordshire. And even if you look at the atlas of the 19th century surname atlas, the Archer software one, the ratios there show that those surnames are more common in Oxfordshire than not all the other counties, but a lot of them. So it's interesting that those occupational surnames seem to be more common in Oxfordshire, or at least some of them.
Yeah, that is interesting. In fact, one of the key factors for me joining the society was because there was the indexes that you have. I think it's your wills. You've got quite a lot online. Even as a non-member, you can see quite a lot online. And you know, like all of us, I did a quick scan to see how many butchers and things that there were, and there's quite a few. I also have one other link into Oxfordshire, which is a kind of a sideline into my butchers, and that's from the name of Sheffield, which happened to be very specific into one place, which happened to be somewhere called Enstone. But that's a different subject really. But I think it's more, isn't it? It's about developing, and you've got this project that I think is quite ambitious. And if I'd known, perhaps, I don't know, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, that this project would be done by a society, I probably would be thinking, not sure they'll pull that off, just because, you know, all societies are volunteer led, and it's a lot of hours. And yeah, here you are at the end of a significant bit, because obviously you've got all that data, you've done a whole load of stuff to put it together, and now you've got a book that you've managed to write, and probably you're sitting back now and thinking, slight breather, because now you move on to the next phase. But what an achievement. What an achievement. I think that's great. So I think it's important that people realise that actually the amount of work this takes and the platform it gives, not just the society or people with studies, but the possibility. And it's no mean feat to achieve something as significant, and I haven't seen the book, remember. So but I know from a workload, and I know from writing the Surname Guide for Guilds, like 40 pages, I know how long that took. So writing this book for, I don't know, 200 or 300 pages, I'm pretty sure took quite a lot of time and lots of probably ready meals. But anyway,
I think one thing to say, if I can, is
absolutely.
I think the key thing is having had Sue project managing this, because it wasn't just us, the three of us. There were other people writing chapters, other people doing all kinds of transcriptions, and without Sue to manage all that and to make sure we were kind of, kept on the job throughout, it wouldn't have happened. So I think it's a key requirement, if you're talking about other family history societies or other one-namers doing this kind of project, is you need a project manager who knows how to do that, because otherwise you just have lots of people doing little bits and it doesn't actually come together. So I think all credit to Sue for managing this so far and beyond.
And we should mention that Jessica's experience in publishing was a great help as well.
Yes, I think when you get people who are working deep in a project, as Richard and I have been, to be able to have someone come along later on in the project saying, I can pick this up and make it look good and happen, and you know, actually deal with all the commercial side of it. I think we were you know, getting to the 21st mile of the marathon at this stage and beginning to flag. And so actually when Jessica came along all full of energy, it was great. So I think all these things are teamwork, and you have to get, as in anything, it doesn't matter whether it's something to do with family history or not, you have to get people with different skills coming along and contributing their pieces. And I think that's the only way this is going to happen. And you can't just have one person or two people. You've got to have the right mixture of people.
Yeah, I would agree. I do have some publishing questions that we will get to, so I'm just conscious, as Jessica's been thinking, no one's asked me a question. There are some questions. Richard, you were going to say something.
I was just going to comment that I suggested at one stage that we write volume 1 on this, and I got some very quick answers.
Yeah, I have a question. In fact, it says, do you see another volume or an offshoot to your project?
Well, I do, but I don't think Sue and I will be doing it.
Yeah, I think you know, once we got this towards the end and we looked at the chapters that we had produced, it certainly triggered a few ideas, and some things we had to drop that we just couldn't include in the book. So you know, there's material there for a volume 2. It's just I think we need a breather, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, I can see you've got some chapters from, or at least on the thing on the slides, Quakers, Methodists, surnames of Roman Catholics. I knew there was going to be a chapter on Quakers because I saw an email that suggested, I think it was the Quaker Family Society that hopefully got involved. And I think it's, no, I think it's a great project. We've had some questions come in that I'm just going to slot in before the rest of mine. So another Julie says, from your experience when approaching an individual about a DNA test, would you, 1, write to them first, or 2, buy a kit and send it to them in the hope they would do it?
Depends how rich you are.
So some people just won't even look at a DNA test. But Sue's been very good at drumming up support at family history fairs and things. And we had a couple of a competition where the prizes were DNA kits that were supported by the society. So those sort of things help. So
okay.
I feel a bit out of this because I'm a bit far removed from where most of the Oxfordshire people are.
I can give you my opinion, Julia, and I would perhaps write to them first and then say, look, you know, I'll buy the kit if you're prepared to do it. I think also depends on how well you know the person. If it was somebody I didn't know at all, or they were just an email contact, I would definitely email them first. Whereas some people, you know, that if you give them a kit and they say no, they'll give you the kit back and you can just recycle it to somebody else, assuming it's not being used. So I would always ask, I think. Charles
Sorry, over the last 10 years or so, I can't count the number of people who've said that they would get DNA tested for a project and I've never heard from them again. And they didn't do a DNA test. So there's a lot of disappointment in trying to get people to DNA test.
Yeah, I think, and maybe it's part of this big brother view of, you know, we don't want to have our DNA where you can't control it. But of course, you know.
There are several groups of people. There are people who are probably like most of us who are keen on family history and want to know every little detail of what's happened in the family, whether people like it or not. And most of us are like that, but there's a lot of people who just won't even look at it. And there are people in between who are sort of skeptical, and you have to do a bit of work on those people to get them to come round and do it. And you may have to pay for it yourself if you seriously want it.
Yeah, because they're not cheap, are they? Particularly, I suppose. Okay, so Charles asks, how relevant is the book Surnames of Oxfordshire by Richard Mckinley, so published 1977, to the development of the 400 surnames?
Well, I think what we've done is broader than that, because he concentrated on only a few hundreds. And there are other surnames. So I would like to think we added to what he's done, but there are a lot of surnames missing. That's just my opinion. I don't know what Sue thinks, but and Jessica. It's a great book.
You know, we've got a chapter in our book that says that Richard wrote, which is essentially what is an Oxfordshire surname, and you can spend the next 10 years debating what an Oxfordshire surname is. And a lot of people base things on, well, my family's been there for 3 generations, therefore we're Oxfordshire, or it was there in 1891, therefore it's Oxfordshire, or it was there in 1400, therefore it's Oxfordshire. And you have to use different criteria to try and work out what an Oxfordshire surname is, and it's a mixture. So it's anybody who writes a book or does anything based on that, you know, you're never going to get one set of definitive lists, a list that says this is an Oxfordshire surname and this isn't. We picked up the ones that we used based on all sorts of different criteria and have done the best we can to whittle it down from, well, 10,000 to about 400. And, you know, each book that comes along is going to have different things. And you even look at surname dictionaries. There's lots of surname dictionaries out there. And they'll say, oh, this was first seen in Oxfordshire. It may have been, but it may have disappeared within 100 years. So, you know, there's lots of different ways of looking at it. And I think every book will add something.
We found some that are in surname dictionaries that are located in the early days in other counties, but we found references to them in Oxfordshire that are early as well that aren't in the dictionary. So it cuts both ways a little bit.
Yeah, I think also it's the approach, isn't it? That's the other thing, is if you've got an academic writing the book, whereas if you have somebody that is perhaps hobby driven, or I don't want to be dismissive of the Oxfordshire Society approach to it, but I think it's a different level. I'm not sure that I've really articulated that very well. I think it's almost, if you think about it from a view of, so an academic book might be, say, top down, whereas perhaps the Oxfordshire Family History Society approach is from the bottom up, which is...
Well, I think we've tried to look at ordinary people.
Yeah.
Through the centuries. So there's material on occupations and people who did what in various places in Oxfordshire, and so we've tried to broaden that out, and in writing it we've tried to not be overly academic, but tried to keep it sort of a middle path. So people might argue with us that parts are not referenced in as detail as they might have liked, but that gets to be a problem for many people, over referencing and academic referencing. So.
And I think
sorry,
the
go ahead.
other thing to say is this book is not a dictionary. It's not a list of family trees. It is taking different aspects of life in Oxfordshire and looking at them. And it's pretty much all new research. It's not something that somebody else has published. So we are taking a different angle in this book. It's not one of these things that, oh, I've looked up my surname, it's Butcher, and if I go in the book, I'll find a family tree for all the Butchers. It's looking at things like early names and how they changed and disappeared. It's looking at the cycle of names over time. It's looking at jobs. It's looking at people who moved around. And it's using case studies, really, and stories about those people, which we hope will stimulate people to say, oh, I could adapt that to my own family history research. It's not something that's going to look like a comprehensive dictionary of surnames in Oxfordshire. That's not what the book's about.
And I think that's the approach that I anticipated from that. That was the approach I thought you'd taken. Bearing in mind, I haven't been on the inner circle. What I would say is I think that's the beauty with the one name study, is that you gather all this material for your study. So obviously I'm collecting Butchers. I'm also collecting another name too for a different part of the world. You're collecting the instances of that surname wherever they are. The plan is, of course, to be global. And the reason you're global is because obviously migrational spreads. But of course, what you can do is no one says you have to collect.
I think you've frozen.
Do it. This is the ability name study to not only collect all the data where where it is, but you have the ability to focus on other parts. So you can focus and you can do some assessment and you can go across disciplines. So, and that's what I think is great about a one name study. And it sounds to me that the approach that you've taken is exactly the same, is that you've taken the data and you've just effectively you've cut the cake into in a different way. And I almost align it to a Battenberg effectively, is that whereas you would normally slice through and get a piece of Battenberg that's got a bit mixture of all three colours, maybe you just like the chocolate bit and you cut it the other way. So I think that's a good way, and I think that that's a good thing to be, certainly from a studies perspective. But of course, if you've got a surname that's in a place, it's a good approach, and it gives a study a different dimension.
Perhaps I should mention that in the Oxfordshire doesn't have a barbed wire fence around it. So the distribution of the surnames within the county spills across the borders both ways. So for the DNA project, we accept people in neighbouring counties. And it's obviously, I hope people when they read this book will realise that there's movement backwards and forwards, not just to local neighbouring counties, but to much broader area of Britain.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from if you're looking at it from a surname perspective, surnames pretty much go everywhere because people migrate. They may migrate and go, and they've gone forever, or maybe they ping pong back and forth, and they'll do that for a variety of reasons. And I think and certainly from my personal experience, that I'm a Surrey girl, and I know that my family is Surrey, Sussex, and Hampshire, and in particular that little bit where the three counties meet is kind of my zone, if you like. But when I did my Autosomal with Ancestry DNA, mine has always been on my ethnicity chart, bang in the middle. So 50% pretty much British, and it always breaks it down into those counties, always. I also have a bit of Warwickshire chucked in there. And my other 50% is Italian. And it always breaks it down to Sicilian, which is exactly right. So I look at the ethnicity and I think that's pretty accurate for me. Now, I know some people, the scientists perhaps, or the DNA experts always tell you not to be worrying about that. But for me, it's always been pretty bang on. But what I noticed on 2 or 3 versions of ethnicity recently, I have a bit of Oxfordshire pop in there. Which I thought was curious because I'm not aware that I actually have any of my ancestors that were in Oxfordshire, apart from the Enstone bit that I've already mentioned. So I think it gives you possibilities as you're thinking about the split of names and where they go.
If these little bits of Oxfordshire or whatever are quite small, the reality is that as the companies get their control populations improved with time, you might find they disappear and other ones pop up. So my early ethnicities, or whatever you want to call them, mixtures, said there was some Cornish in my makeup. That's all disappeared, but I've got some Staffordshire and I can support the Staffordshire part, but I can't support the Cornish stuff. So over the years, things have changed and they'll keep on changing.
Yeah, I noticed a change actually on my ethnicity, and I don't want to bring this back to DNA again, but I did notice a change in that, and I picked up some Sardinian, and I had a hypothesis, and the hypothesis matched the Sardinian bit, and I was all fired up, thinking, well, I've got to start somewhere, so Sardinia is a good place to go. I noticed it's dropped, and it's now gone to Malta, and I think it's interesting, but again, it's more of a hypothesis supporting, and you have to start somewhere with all your research. So I'm just going to quickly go to another question from another person who's listening in. So Julie says, my husband's family, so this is the Parker family, are originally from Gloucestershire, but from the South Drop area from about 1770 onwards. This is on the very edge of Gloucestershire, with the west of the Oxfordshire border near Brampton. I noticed that Parker was included in your list as there are some of the name in the wives that they married. I'm waiting for the results of his Y-DNA test from Family Tree. Family DNA. Would it be a good idea for him to join your project?
Yes, I mean, that's perfectly all right. That's right on the border with Oxfordshire, and we accept people from there. So yes, get him to join.
Okay, so next bit now. So thanks for your answer on the DNA kit. It's one particular person. She lives in Spain and we've exchanged Christmas cards for years. She's quite elderly, but is the last person born in the UK with a different surname. So this is the Rig Maiden surname. I feel the time is of the essence. In which case, Julie, I would say, write her a nice note, send her something in the post that she might like. I don't know, a magazine, or I'm always dodgy about toiletries. You can't really send toiletries to people, can you? You're kind of implying people get upset, don't they? So send her a nice present and say, look, would you do this test for me because you're the, and be realistic. If she's elderly, you know, she will be aware that she has more behind her than in front. I wouldn't tell her that, but you know, she'll be aware of that. So I would say go for it. Diane says not everyone is as obsessive as we are. Yeah, I think you're probably quite right, actually. Not everyone is as obsessive as we are. Yeah. And I think this is in regard to people that ask questions about joining a DNA project and then don't take the tests. And the comment from Diane is perhaps people get unwell and then aren't in a position to follow up. And also, I don't know whether COVID has perhaps had an impact. I don't mean with all the restrictions but perhaps people weren't doing tests because they were just mindful. Who knows? I'm just having a quick look here, see if we've had another question pop in. So I'm quickly going to do that. I've had to shrink my box of the questions because I can't otherwise see the 4 of you on my screen. So I've shrunk the box a bit too much and now I can't read all the questions. Just bear me a second. Okay. So this is from Wendy. From my correspondence archives, there's an email from Richard close to exactly 10 years ago to me as the then Oxfordshire Family History Society chairman, proposing an Oxfordshire DNA project. I have my reply. I could float it with the OFHS committee. Would you be willing to be the overall coordinator for OFT? I also recall bringing this up a committee and Sue offering to be the executive committee DNA coordinator. So I think the message is Wendy's view was you asked and she delivered and you then offered. So I think she's saying you've pulled it off. So
I hope so.
So I suspect you've got a former, well, I know you've got a former chairman in your corner who would likely support any potential projects you may have or potentially be thinking about having in the future. So Debbie Kennett says there's a publicity available index to the Surnames references. Oh, is there? There might be in the future. I asked Debbie, I asked if there was an index of surnames, which I've promised to not pass on, just because I wanted to be able to have something before today's session. And I had hoped the book might arrive before then, but it hasn't. And I understand, not everything's delivered on the timetables that we want it to be. So I said, look, is there a list of surnames? So going back to the rest of your question, is my Wiggins ancestors were blanket weavers from Witney in the 1600s and 1700s. Will the book include background information on this occupation?
There's one chapter that looks at the population of Witney as a case study as part of it, and talks a little bit about the blanket industry and its impact on it, and obviously something a little in the Methodist side in terms of a lot of the blanket weavers were all Methodists. So there are bits and pieces there, and I think that's always the danger. If we put an index out and said, here are the surnames, and people say, oh, my surname isn't there, so I don't want to read the book. And this, like I say, this book is not like that. It's not going to tell you specifics about a specific family in a specific context, unless it's one of our case studies. And we have lots and lots of case studies. And it would be a pity that people said, oh, my surname isn't in the book, therefore I don't want to read it, because it's not that type of book. It's taking examples and saying, isn't this interesting? Why don't you go off and try and find something similar for your own family? So it should be a stimulating book rather than I'm going to find the answer to something in a specific chapter on a specific page.
I'm with you on that, actually, Sue, from a perspective of having written a course in the last year that looked at European researching in Europe. And I did exactly the same. I pulled out case studies because you need to give someone an illustration of what they can do. And it's, if you had all the answers, you could write a book, you could run a whole load of courses, whatever it is you're doing, you can't do the research for everybody. So this is about, it's getting you fired up, and hopefully people are fired up. I'm looking forward to getting my book. So people who write to me shouldn't expect a prompt response, because I'll be even slower. So Alan, I wanted to get some questions. So I'm just going to very quickly just put this question in from Alan, because he wants to ask, this is about a DNA thing. So I'm just going to quickly chuck this one in. Was there one or more DNA halotype that had a higher frequency in Oxfordshire compared with a control group?
The haplogroups in Oxfordshire, there is a chapter on DNA, and it doesn't discuss surnames because there's privacy issues with that, but it does summarise the mitochondrial and Y-DNA haplogroups, and pretty much the haplogroups represented are pretty much what you'd expect from Western Europeans. I've compared it with a similar database for South Australians and Tasmanians, and South Australians are pretty similar, except there's a larger German group, and the Tasmanians have a larger Irish, or groups that I would expect from Ireland. But apart from that, all the main haplogroups are the normal set that you'd expect from Western Europe. Does that answer the question?
Hopefully. Alan, if it doesn't, just pop another one in, but I want to just bring Jessica in and just get some questions about the publishing. And so, were there any surprise, well, from a publishing perspective, you got the draft from Sue and Richard. What did you do? Tell us what you did next, and kind of.
That's not quite how it worked, because it was evolving at that point. So
Right.
At that stage, we were still trying to make pivot tables based on all the baptism records and things like that. And we didn't know what was going to be in the book.
Okay.
So at that early stage, I was contacting various publishers and saying, here's a rough idea of the kind of book we think we're going to produce. Would you be interested? But the book was still definitely, it was not clear what the chapters were going to be, who was going to write chapters, what was going to be left out or put in. So I think that would be my lesson from that, really, is I probably approached publishers before we were ready, and we didn't have a proper outline that we could give them. So none of the kind of publishers that I approached were very interested at that point. And then we eventually found a publisher called Troubadour, and they have a self-publishing arm called Matador Publishing, and that's who we went with. And they've been pretty good, very accommodating, but it was all very much, it wasn't the case that we had a finished book to approach publishers with. We were still negotiating what, who would write what. So it's been a very flexible process. I think a good example of teamwork, and other authors involved as well. So.
Okay, so bearing in mind, Richard can envisage a volume 2. Sue's on the fence and probably looking the other way from Richard. In terms of, do you think this could be another book? What would your view be? So if I said to you, look, you're going to do this, Richard and Sue are going to do this book, what would be the way that you would want a second version to go, a second volume to go? What do you think would be a really good follow-up? Bear in mind, you've seen it, I haven't, hence the question.
Oh, that's tricky. History. I mean, I actually got very interested in first names, which is completely off topic for this group, but I'm really interested in naming patterns and how, you're looking at the baptism records, people naming their children after themselves, and how that changes through time, and in different contexts outside of Oxfordshire as well. But there are so many different topics that, I mean, hopefully people will write to us and say, I would like to offer you a chapter on this in your next book. But I don't think at this stage we want to definitely be saying that there will be a a second book.
Yeah, that was a bit mean.
It's a lot of work, and we need some time, I think.
Yeah.
But I can see useful stuff being done on occupations, on the effect of the university on the Oxfordshire life. There's stuff around, but it can be presented in a different and interesting way. That's, as I said before, I think what's often missed is the ordinary people.
Can I ask a question? How did you come down to the I think it's 400 names, isn't it? How did you whittle them down to 400? Not that I've got any Featherstones in Oxford, I've just checked.
Well, we started off with about 1,500 that we could get baptism and burial data for information, and it was just overwhelming. So what? And I don't have much local knowledge, so Sue brought the local knowledge bit in. But what I did was I used the 19th century surname atlas, where you can get a value.
Yep.
You know it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it has a column of ratios in there that tells you how common a surname is in a county or a port or union compared to other counties. So that was for 1881, and it's a bit late in the period that we've been interested in, because we start in earnest when baptisms and parish registers started, 1538. But it was a handy way of looking at the surnames and trying to select ones that were of interest, at least because of the weight of numbers, I guess, in the county compared to other counties. And the other thing was, there are surnames that arrived in the county in the various times through the last 600 years, and you can't rule them out if they've been in the county for centuries. My family came from North Gloucestershire in 1555, but there was another Merry family already in the county, and I can't join them up. They're different families. So
what I was thinking was, could you do another book with just the next 400 in?
Well, as I say, we took the approach that we weren't going to go by surname. We've taken it, from the different angles. But it took a long time to get that list of roughly 400, because we had lots of negotiations over this one's been around a long time, or this one had good high numbers, or there are all sorts of reasons for doing it. But I think
and you didn't look at the surnames in the 1500s still existing in 1881.
Yes, we did. Read some of the chapters of the book. You'll find some of this stuff about surnames over time, and which ones stayed around, which ones went, and what it was like in Oxfordshire relative to other areas. There is a chapter on that.
Right. Thank you.
There's the surname mapping on the Oxfordshire website too, isn't there? There used to be.
Oh, you mean on the Oxfordshire Family History Society site? Okay.
Yep.
I would kind of urge people actually to, if you're looking for a good book to read, now bear in mind I've ordered my copy, but I still haven't seen it. If you're looking for a good book to read, I would say order it. And I think for a very reasonable price of £10 a year, I think the society's worth joining, says somebody who has got no
Does it
Oxfordshire
come free?
No, it doesn't come free. But I think that approaches like I think this is such an unusual project, and I think unusual projects, it's always difficult, isn't it? Because you either go out on a limb and people are watching, and is it going to be a success or not? And I think actually the approach is this society's gone out on a whim, and actually I think it's got real potential, and I think should be applauded and supported, personally.
We could have produced a book like there's a book on Cornish surnames, and I can't remember how many pages it's got, but it's got half a page on a number of surnames, and you learn virtually you learn a little bit about them. But so we've approached the one name sheets to be a bit better than that, more than half a page. They run to 4 or 5, 6 pages with some detail about maybe where to look for people in early times, and some maps. But it's time consuming putting these things together, and I think if I was asked how could we sort of improve this or approach it better, is we probably need a couple more people interested in writing some of these things, but following the formula that we've established, we hope, just to help us get through the pile of surnames that we want to.
Yeah, I was just wondering, have you challenged the Oxfordshire membership to do that, or haven't you mentioned it?
We've certainly mentioned it lots and lots of times, but as many of you will know, getting volunteers is not always that easy.
I know that.
Yeah, we're familiar with that one. And that was kind of my question right at the beginning, was when I said about people that perhaps wanted to volunteer to either write or support the surname sheets. Certainly I would personally be, I'm never one to say to someone, why don't you do this, and then not contribute. So I've always worked from the principle of never ask someone to do a job you wouldn't do yourself. So I would be quite happy to be supportive and make any contributions to the Butcher sheet or to the Sheffield sheet, because that's the other surname of interest. But, you know, you've got your way of working, and that's fine, and at some point I'll drop you an email. Now it's just gone 1 o'clock, so we've been going at this for just over an hour actually, so I want to kind of wrap up. We've covered all the questions that I had on my sheet. So I had a question on here that says, what was your end game? Which you managed to, you've answered the question already, because you told me about this database, this index you've got, which is kind of your extra string, if you like. What's your biggest takeaway from the project, the whole project, as you're looking down at it? Your biggest takeaway, if I can just get that from the three of you.
I guess possibly I knew this, but doing the research for the project, the thing that really interests me is how interconnected everybody is, and how you think that this was a group off in a corner of North Oxfordshire, or this was a group who were in London, or this was a surname that did this. And it's so easy to suddenly find that everybody's linked to everybody else. And going through this research, I think finding the fact that there were so many interconnections and so many times that you kept tripping over the same things over and over again, and also discovering new items about how surnames cycle through time and that. So I think there were a lot of very interesting things, and I'd always encourage anybody I mean, I've got a research background anyway, but I'd always encourage anybody just to do some research, because you can be surprised what you can find by getting into doing some research.
Okay.
Can I tell a little story?
Absolutely.
In this book, there's a chapter on Quakers, and there are Quakers who were clockmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a Tasmanian friend of many years who had the same surname, and he was also from a Quaker family. So I emailed him and asked him if he knew anything about this particular family, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's probably us. We're from Drayton, or Drayton Mill." And that has opened up a whole Pandora's box of stuff, because when that family migrated from Oxfordshire, or from England, originally Oxfordshire, but they settled in South Australia in 1839. So there's a Quaker community here, family here with the same surname. And part of that family went to Tasmania, so they were all interrelated. But looking at that family, the surname was May, but one of the May family married a Hitchman, and it turns out I have Hitchman ancestors from Chipping Norton as well. So me and my friend are probably related. And that came as a big surprise, because I had no idea. I've known him since we were 17 or so. So 60 years. And to discover this connection was really interesting. And unless you're involved in something like this, you don't discover these things.
I think also you get slightly to the migration angle, but the marriage pool of people was quite small. People, yes, people migrated, and some of them travelled huge distances and some didn't. And I've got the same situation in Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire. My mum's side of the family, which is what that area is, 300 years in a space of no more than 30 miles, probably. And I was working my way back through my grandfather's line, so my maternal line, and stopped and went down into Hampshire to connect with a local history society, because I had a whole load of access to the parish registers. So this is probably, I don't know, the early 90s. And I'm going through the marriage register and I'm looking. By now I'm working on my maternal grandmother's family. And I see this marriage, and there was just something about it. It's like I've seen that marriage somewhere already in my records. Am I in the wrong place? So as I was working through it, I thought I'd maybe seen it on the film. The film had been done and was with the local archives, but the book I was looking at went on beyond the filming, which is why I went to visit it. So I thought I'd think more of it and carried on researching. I get home and I plough my way through my notes to find that my records I already had related to my grandfather's family. What I'd just done related to my grandmother's family, and they married in 1939. So I now know that my grandparents were sixth cousins. They had absolutely no idea. And I find that I've got the same surnames, keeps cropping up. I've got 2 lines of Ellises and 2 lines of Butchers and 2 lines of most other names in that bit of the southeast. So I think I'm not surprised with you and your friend. I think sometimes you don't realise, you just know someone came from the same, roughly the same area, and you have that commonality. But it's only when you start digging deeper that there's more similarities. And I think that's the beauty of researching, is that you find all this stuff, and it's the sort of stuff that's so exciting. You know, some people are excited by, I don't know, chemical equations and mathematical puzzles, and I must be the only person on the planet not doing that whole Sudoku thing that seems to be about, because this is my thing. This is what I love, is seeing the family connections, and where you have that marriage pool and people keep intermarrying, not in a improper way, but just the same names keep cropping up time and time again, and you realize that actually cousins and friends of cousins, and how communities worked, is you have that there was that connection at some other level. Jessica, what about you? What would be your takeaway?
I would say, I think just what I've learned from the book, really, so the wealth of resources that are out there for everybody, and the different approaches. So one of the questions I get a lot is, how do I break down my brick walls? And this is how. This gives people lots of different places to look. So, for example, there's a chapter on advertising your family business in Oxfordshire. Even if your ancestors weren't in Oxfordshire, you can use that information to think about, well, where could I look for information about my family who had a shop or had a butcher's van, or, you know, whatever it is. So it's just giving people lots of ideas, I think, like you say, to, you know, get them excited and thinking about, are there other places I could look beyond, you know, the first few records that I've looked at on particular websites or census records. You know, it's just going to give people lots of ideas, I think.
Can I just add that the book is fantastically well illustrated, and this is because Sue has rummaged around all sorts of places and dug up some fantastic photographs and other pictures, and they really make it a good book to enjoy as well. Just these pictures are all interesting.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like, is there, looking at a book that's got graphs, pictures, any illustration that's in colour. So actually, for the price of the book, to know that you're going to get a colour book, I think it's great. I think it's great value. We've had just a couple of things. Diane has just left, but before she's gone, she's just as excellent. Must get the book. Thank you. And the next question is from Alan, who says, when is the book out?
Jessica, answer that one.
I wouldn't like to give a date, but I would just say we're nearly there, and we will get it out as soon as we can. Everything takes a little bit longer than we think it will, but it will be good when it comes.
So it's worth the wait. I'm looking forward to getting my copy and reading it, and I don't plan on answering any emails until I've at least gone through half the book, with all my little bookmarky little tab things that I tend to do, which is add a pen and a piece of paper and make some notes. I'm assuming there's no more questions from anyone. If anyone does have any questions afterwards, you can send them to webinars@one-name.org, and I will forward them to Richard, Sue and Jessica. Of course, if you're a member of Oxfordshire, you have all the three of them on tap, so you'll be able to access them. Thank you so much, the three of you. I think this has been a kind of a hybrid webinar. And I hope it's worked for people who came and sat and listened, or the people that will be listening if they get home from work and want to listen for an hour or so worth of information. And to the three of you, thank you so much for spending some time of your morning with me and to ask the question. Of course, for Richard, he'll be toddling off to bed because you are, I don't know, 9.5 hours ahead of us.
It's nearly 10 o'clock.
Yeah. So thank you so much to the three of you. I'm going to end the recording in just a moment, but when I do that, because I haven't, Sue knows, but the two of you probably don't, is that it's kind of like the drop of death. I click stop and everyone disappears. So when I say thank you, I really do mean thank you, and I mean also goodbye at the same time. But the three of you will get an email from me probably tomorrow. So thank you everyone for spending some time with us today. Thank you to Richard, Sue, and Jessica for
Thank you.
today, spending some time with us today, and for, I know, writing a great book that I'm looking forward to reading. And if you're not a member of Oxfordshire, and I'm not on commission, you must join them because they're a really great society. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much to the three of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.